basis. So today's lecture is continuing our journey with regard to perception. And I wanted to bring you back to our model of information processing. Notice how you have input at the beginning of the model, stimulus identification here, a response selection, the programming of that response, and then output. If I were to look at perception, you would see that perception falls within the process stimulus identification in this model. It's a cognitive process, and what perception does is help us to identify certain stimuli in the environment. What I want you to realize is that stimuli come in many different forms, and also there are many factors that affect whether or not we engage with stimuli in our environment. Over the next two lectures, both today and in class on Thursday, we're going to talk about some of the changes in the individual and also the stimuli that could affect the perception of information. Generally, it's thought that past experience and therefore the expectations that a person has shapes their perception of stimuli or the environment. So just to continue, that process that we were just talking about, the information processing model, the whole model, is measured by a variable called reaction time. And reaction time measures how long it takes to recognize that there's a stimulus in the environment that's relevant to you, to take it to the brain and perceive that stimulus, and then match it with memory processes, and then to make decisions and organize output. So you'll notice that I have here the start of a swim meet, and what I want to show you is that this timeline indicates the reaction time phase. The reaction time is from the time that the signal sounds, and then approximately 160 to 190 milliseconds later, you begin to see the swimmer push out of the blocks. Now, you might not recognize that that delay occurs, but in fact, now that I've pointed it out to you, notice the start of a race or an event and how that affects the start, that the stimulus is actually sounded or given to the performer, and then the performer has a delay before you actually see movement begin. So again, you can see our model here, and reaction time would be the whole measure from input, including the central processes, and right there, just as output is beginning, in other words, that motor pattern is beginning to emerge, right there is the end of the reaction time phase. In next week, we're going to talk about the output just a little bit. That would be the movement itself, and that's measured with another variable called movement time. Notice here I've used the word overt movement. Just as that movement is beginning is the end of the reaction time phase. So reaction time comes in three different types. The first type is what we refer to as simple reaction time. Simple reaction time means that you have a single stimulus and you're going to respond to that stimulus when it occurs. So in simple reaction time paradigms, you could pre-program your response and be ready to go the minute the sound of the horn, the shot of the gun, the sound of the official's voice. Choice reaction time means that there are multiple stimuli in the environment that are relevant to the performer. and the performer does not know which of those stimuli is going to occur. Therefore, pre-programming is not an option in a choice reaction time paradigm, because you have to wait to see the stimulus in order to process the central processing for that particular stimulus. Discrimination reaction time means that there are multiple stimuli, but only one of those stimuli receives a response. The other stimuli, the response is inhibited. So, just so that you can see this, an old-fashioned stopwatch that we used to use, you can see that this sweep is actually the second hands, and then you have, I believe this would be maybe tenths of a second, and then you have probably hundredths of seconds here. No, actually, this is a 30-second timer, so it has to sweep twice in order to have 1 minute, and then this would be the 100 seconds, or, yeah, okay. So at any rate, not that important for us to focus here right now, but regardless, the story is when I was in high school, I served as the boys' swim manager, and the reason that I served as the manager for the boys team was that the boys coach allowed me to work out with the boys if I served as the manager. There was no girls swimming team during the time that I was in high school until I was a senior in high school. At any rate, he taught us that you start the watch the moment that you hear the sound of the horn. At that time it was a gun, and you stop it the moment you see the touch on the wall. So notice that this would be a simple reaction time, because it actually incurs two reaction times. One would be at the start of the race to start the switch here, and then at the end of the race you would push the switch again to stop the stopwatch. Only one stimulus in each of those places, and only one response that's affiliated or associated with each of those stimuli. In a choice reaction time paradigm, you might have multiple stimuli to either hand. This would be, I think, a sound stimuli. And basically, you can see that I could have 2 choice reaction time, 3 choice, 8 choice, and so forth. In a light like this, a stoplight, you can see that there would be 3 choices: red, yellow, and green. You know that the yellow and green exist. And depending upon which stimulus you get, you either step on the brake quickly, you step on the brake slowly, you step on the gas as fast as you can if you're in New York and it's a yellow light. And green, you know that you step on the gas. You know that that's a joke about stepping on the gas on the yellow light in New York. So discrimination reaction time, on the other hand, today we have stoplights that have arrows with them. And so I might get a left arrow or a right arrow, but I'm actually waiting for the green light. And so I have to inhibit my response to the stimulus left arrow or to the stimulus right arrow, and I have to wait to respond to the stimulus green light. The game Simon Says is an excellent example of a discrimination reaction time paradigm. Simon says, stand up, sit down. How many of you actually sat down? Notice that you didn't inhibit your reaction time as is required in this discrimination reaction time paradigm. So there are several factors actually that affect whether or not we identify stimuli. And they include stimulus clarity. In other words, how sharp something is or how in focus the information is. Notice here I've added some words, and what I've done is try to make it so that the focus is not as sharp, obviously, as here where I've identified stimulus clarity as an important factor affecting stimulus identification. Also, stimulus intensity affects whether or not we identify a stimulus. So, is the stimulus bright enough and is it loud enough? These are the kinds of things that we're looking for when we're describing the quality of the stimulus. And we're going to use this again as we move forward in our lectures on Thursday as we talk about signal detection. Also, peripheral vision affects stimulus identification. Experts tend to have better peripheral vision than novices, which means that they are better able to pick up information at the extremities than are novices, and thus they are better apt to pick up relevant stimuli that are in their field of view. In 1908, two researchers, their names are Yerkes and Dodson, founded something called the inverted U hypothesis. This hypothesis laid the groundwork for much of the sports psychology work that was conducted in the 1960s and the 1970s. It will help us to understand further, again, as we begin to unpack signal detection theory. Notice here you have two axes. You have your x-axis and your y-axis. On the x-axis, what I've plotted here, or what Yerkes and Dodson plotted, are arousal levels. You'll notice that this would be low levels of arousal, and this would be high levels of arousal. On the y-axis, you'll notice that performance is plotted. Performance could be poor or good. At the top of the inverted U, where you see the asterisk, that describes the optimal level of performance. Can you describe why the placement of the asterisk represents the optimal level of performance? So what are the things that might affect the inverted U hypothesis? One is inter and intra-individual differences. Our past experiences make each of us different and also create a set of expectations within us for what we think is going to happen in a particular environment. Certain smells might bring up information that would affect you that has no effect whatsoever on me, and vice versa. The meaningfulness of information, how meaningful information is to you. If you feel that a class is a waste of time and you don't understand any of the material, it's not a meaningful class to you, and therefore that could affect the placement on the inverted U hypothesis. Complexity. If I had to take chemistry 1A and 1B and physics 2A and 2B, I'm not sure how well I would do because that information is quite complex. So you're all operating at very high levels. Any variation creates arousal in individuals. And that arousal could be good, and it also could affect you in ways that push you over the inverted U. As well, uncertainty in the environment. If you are walking through the streets at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, by yourself, and somebody walks up behind you, that would represent uncertainty in the environment. And so you could see here the fog. I have some uncertainty as I get down to the bottom of the steps. I can't see what's there. And so that contributes to my levels of arousal. But in fact, if the environment looked something like this, then I really have some uncertainty because of the physical conditions, the mechanics, the biomechanics related to the ice on the road, the fog. All of that is going to affect my perception of information, my ability to detect it further out, as compared to a gorgeous day like this where I have extremely good vision and I could see with clarity and intensity. So as we move forward in our lecture on Thursday, we're going to be looking at perception in terms of detection, comparison, and recognition. I look forward to seeing you all in class on Thursday and hope you're all healthy. Okay, take care, everybody.